Welcome to Never a Truer Word, where we look at the words that people choose to use to see if they're telling the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and look at giving you some more confidence and understanding what people are saying all around you. And today we're looking at Prince Andrew. Scoop, the Netflix film, is number one here in the UK. Got a lot of people talking once more about the car crash interview that he gave to the BBC a couple of years ago. So we're going to delve into some of the things that Andrew said in that interview, look at his word choices and see if he is telling the truth or what is going on. We will look at quotes from him that have become world famous, like, because going to Pizza Express in Woking is an unusual thing for me to do. No, I've no recollection of ever meeting her. And the classic, I don't sweat, or I didn't sweat at the time. I want you to pick up some things from this episode. I want you to keep an ear out for qualifiers. That's when he says something that sounds very solid, but if you look at the words all around it, perhaps it's not quite as solid as he'd like you to think. And I want you to look for prepared answers as well. Look, he's a very rich person. He's got a lot of people around him. He will have been advised before this interview, maybe even rehearsed some of the harder questions that they think are coming his way. He has some answers, I believe, prepared and ready to go here. And I'm going to tell you as we go through this, how to spot when someone is giving you an answer they've prepared beforehand. I also want to talk about editing because as I was watching the interview, I thought I'm maybe going to have to edit some of this out because it's quite a sensitive subject and I don't want to find myself on the wrong side of the censors. So I have edited bits out, but I noticed the only things I was editing are the questions that are asked. That's where the salacious content was. In Andrew's words, I needed to edit nothing out myself. He didn't talk in any detail about the salacious allegations that were put to him. And I can't vouch for if the BBC have edited something. So I'm going to talk about what I can hear Andrew say, but I don't know if he said more and it was edited out. Are you ready? Let's begin with the first question in the interview.
All of this goes back to your friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. How did you first become friends? How did you meet?
Well, I met through his girlfriend back in 1999, and I'd known her since she was at university in the UK. And it would be, to some extent, a stretch to say that as it were, we were close friends. I mean, we were friends because of other people. And I had a lot of opportunity to go to the United States, but I didn't have much time with him. I suppose I saw him once or twice a year, perhaps maybe maximum of 3 times a year. And quite often, if I was in the United States and doing things, and if he wasn't there, he would say, well, why don't you come and use my houses? So I said, that's very kind, thank you very much indeed. But it would be a considerable stretch to say that he was a very, very close friend. But he had the most extraordinary ability to bring extraordinary people together. And that's the bit that I remember, is going to the dinner parties where you would meet academics, politicians, people from the United Nations. I mean, it was a cosmopolitan group of what I would describe as US eminence.
So what did you notice there in his words? Well, here's what I noticed. The first thing is the question is about his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. And he is asked, how did you first become friends? How did you meet? And he does answer the question. If you're a regular here, you'll know that I'm really, really hung up on, does the person answer the question that they are asked? And he does here. How did you first become friends? How did you meet? Well, I met through his girlfriend back in 1999. So in 1999, is when it happened, but he does say I met through his girlfriend. And then he goes on to say a hell of a lot more, which has got nothing to do with how he became friends with Jeffrey Epstein. He covers how long he's known Jeffrey Epstein's then girlfriend, and then he covers off how big of friends they were, how often he saw him, what they do together, and he follows the whole thing up with talking about the people that he met through Jeffrey Epstein, and talks about that cosmopolitan group of what I would describe as US eminence. That's so far from the question that was asked. How did you become friends? How did you meet? And this is prepared storytelling. He answers the question and then he goes into something that I think he's really prepared because it makes him look better. I wasn't really friends with him. I was friends with someone else. And through Jeffrey Epstein, I got to meet all these amazing people, politicians, academics, people from the United Nations, i.e. not sleazy people like Jeffrey Epstein. And I think that is what he's doing here. He's taken it from how did you meet and gone into what it is that he wants to say. Other things that give that away. He's asked, how did you become friends? And he talks about how they weren't close friends. You weren't asked how close a friend you were of Jeffrey Epstein, Andrew. You were asked, how did you become friends? And he's trying to say, look, we weren't close friends. He begins the answer with well, and that's a tip off straight away. When someone begins an answer with well, it means something unexpected is coming. I'm not really going to deal with your question. I'm going to take your question and say what it is that I want to say. I'm alerting you with the sound of well. I'm going to explain my answer a bit. And that I don't like question answers that start with well. He says, well, I met through his girlfriend back in 1999, who and I've known her since she was at university in the UK, and it would be to some extent a stretch to say that as it were, we were close friends. We were friends because of other people, and I had a lot of opportunity to go to the United States, but I didn't have much time with him. I suppose I saw him once or twice a year, perhaps maybe a maximum of 3 times a year. So look, he's talking about those close friends, and he says it would be to some extent a stretch to say that we were close friends. So if we've got, it would be a stretch to say we were close friends. Well, that doesn't mean we weren't close friends. That just means it's stretching it. And then he minimizes it even more by saying, to some extent, it would be a stretch to say we were close friends. So what he really is saying there is we were to some extent close friends. So even though he's trying to deny it, we can't help the natural words come out that represent what we know to be true. So it's only to some extent a stretch, but not a complete stretch. Not we weren't close friends, we were just friends. No, he lets it all leak out there. Just to some extent, it would be a stretch. We were friends because of other people. Now, there's something I bet he didn't want to say. We were friends because he's trying to distance himself from Jeffrey Epstein entirely. But again, our real, natural, authentic thoughts will come out when we talk. So we were friends, but because of other people. It wasn't his fault he was friends with Jeffrey Epstein. Andrew has no say over who his friends are. I don't believe that. No, it was other people's fault. He says, I saw him once or twice a year, perhaps maybe a maximum of 3 times a year. And I had to pull this one out. There is a theory that 3 is the liar's number. If someone is going to make up a story, then the number 3 is more likely to turn up in it. 3 men did it and ran away, or, I only had 3 drinks. And here he says it was maybe a maximum of 3 times a year. Now, I cannot prove this theory of 3 being the liar's number, so I don't rely on it at all. But it's a well-known theory, and maybe there is some proof of it somewhere. But I don't believe this is true. Why? Well, also he says, I had a lot of opportunity to go to the United States. And then he says, once or twice a year, maybe I'd stay with them a maximum of 3 times. I don't believe that. And potentially this is the proof that I will find to get that 3 is the liar's number in my head. By the way, what I do think this is a lie. It should be documented. If anyone can get in the comments or get in touch on social media and let me know, is it documented how often in 1 year Prince Andrew met Jeffrey Epstein? I would bet that there is at least 1 year or several years where it is more than 3 times a year. Did you notice when he was talking how often he said and I met through his girlfriend back in 1999, who and I've known her since she was at university, and it would be to some extent a stretch to say that as it were, we were close friends, and I had a lot of opportunity to go to the United States, but I didn't have much time with them. This is a sign, again, of a pre-prepared story. He knows what it is he wants to say. And these and and repetitions, that as it were, gives him a chance to think about what it is he wants to say. to consider the next words that his brain is going to send to his mouth. That's what's going on here. He's talking very slowly and very deliberately, and these uhs and these ums are giving him thinking time to get the words out. Not proof that he's telling any lies. That's not what's going on here at all. It's just a sign that what he's saying, he's considering very, very carefully. That answer continues with Andrew saying, and quite often if I was in the United States and doing things, and if he wasn't there, he would say, well, why don't you come and use my houses? So I said, that's very kind. Thank you very much indeed. But it would be a considerable stretch to say that he was a very, very close friend, but he had the most extraordinary ability to bring extraordinary people together. And that's the bit that I remember, is going to dinner parties where you would meet academics, politicians, people from the United Nations. I mean, it was a cosmopolitan group of what I would describe as US eminence. I hope you could hear, I exaggerated it there, but there was more ums and ahs going through there, and it would be a considerable stretch. So again, just signs that he's choosing his words very carefully. See some signs of deception in here as well. He says that if I was in the United States and doing things, if he wasn't there, he is Jeffrey Epstein, if he wasn't there, he would say, well, why don't you come and use my houses? Well, if he wasn't there, would he say come, or would he say go and use my houses? Just think about that. If Jeffrey Epstein isn't in the United States, why would he say come? He would say go, or why don't you use my house? He would say come if Andrew is inviting Andrew to come somewhere where Jeffrey Epstein is. So I spot some deception there. And then he tries to tell us that the bit he remembers is going to these dinner parties where you would meet all these people. He uses the phrase, that's the bit I remember, which says to me that he is aware that there were lots of other bits that he's, I don't know, choosing not to remember. Or really, what is he saying there? That's the bit I want to talk about. That's the bit I want to focus on. That's the bit I want to raise in this interview, is all these dinner parties. But this shows an awareness of other bits, either other bits about what Jeffrey Epstein was doing or what Andrew and Epstein were doing at all. But he's trying to say he only remembers this one bit, which is the dinner parties. Do let me know if you know how often Prince Andrew went to America in a year. You can do it in the comments on this platform if you can, or if not, get in touch on social media. The links are in the show description. We have no marketing budget for Never a Truer Word. We can't spend any money on marketing at all, so you can be the marketing team, and you can do that by pressing the like button. You can do that by sharing with people and letting other people know what is here, and you can press the subscribe or the follow button as well. It all helps this episode get out to more people. Spread the word about this. So please be my marketing team. Press like, press add, comment, share or subscribe, and you will be doing me a big favour, and I will say thank you. Let's have some more from Prince Andrew's interview.
Witnesses say they saw many young girls coming and going at the time. There is video footage of Epstein, and you were there staying in his house, catching up with friends.
I mean, if they were, then I wasn't a party to any of that. I never saw them. I mean, you have to understand that his house, I described it more as almost as a railway station, if you know what I mean, in the sense that there were people coming in and out of that house all the time. What they were doing and why they were there, I had nothing to do with. So I'm afraid I can't make any comment on that, because I really don't know.
So the question is, witnesses say they saw many young girls coming and going at the time. There is a video footage of Epstein and you were there staying in his house catching up with friends. And Andrew says, I mean, if they were, I wasn't party to any of that. I never saw them. I mean, you have to understand that his house, I described it more as almost as a railway station, if you know what I mean, in the sense that there were people coming in and out of that house all the time. What they were doing and why they were there, I had nothing to do with. So I'm afraid I can't make any comments on that, because I really don't know. First part in that answer that I do not like is his phrase, I mean, you have to understand, right? This is manipulative, convincing language. It's saying, look, I'm cleverer than you, or I know more than you, and you have to understand this. You don't know enough to judge me or judge what went on. I do, and I'm telling you the facts, and you have to understand this. That's what those words mean. It's a convincer. He's trying to convince this happened. Normal, truthful people don't feel the need to convince you of what happened. They just feel the need to tell you the facts and events as they happened. But manipulators, they do. They feel the need to say, look, I mean, you have to understand. So I don't like that at all. There's an arrogance there, and there's a bit of manipulation going on there as well. You don't understand everything. I have to make you understand everything. This description of Epstein's house as a railway station. Well, I know what he wants to do. He wants to say it was like a railway station. People were coming and going all the time. I had no idea who any of these people were, but his analogy that he's drawn there is actually quite weak, because it's almost as a railway station. So it's not a railway station, you know, it's not so busy, and it's in the sense that people were coming and going. So it's quite, although he wants to get across the hustle, the bustle, all these people coming and going, and in a railway station you just don't know who all these other people are, but he can't honestly say that, which is why it becomes almost a radio station, a railway station, and in the sense that that was happening. And he says people coming in and out of the house all the time. People, one of the 8 words liars use. If someone talks about people, they're not being very specific at all. They're just talking about people in general. I'm not saying that every time someone says people, they're telling a lie. What I am saying is if you hear someone use people, then it's so general. Why are they not being more specific? Why are they not being more specific? I find it very strange that someone world famous and kind of surrounded by security, I would imagine, just thinks that people were coming and going all the time, and that there was no specifics around any of this, who these people were. Tabloid journalists might be interested in staying in the same place or coming in the same house as where Prince Andrew is, but no, these were just people. He starts the answer by saying, I never, and then he checks himself, thinks better about it, and says, if they were, I wasn't party to any of that. I think he wanted just to offer a blanket denial. But what I see a lot in this interview is that the wording is really carefully chosen. And it's very ambiguous. It's very open. So that if someone does discover some facts that would or he sets himself up not to be able to talk in a way that he could then be contradicted by facts. And there's nothing we like less than being called liars or being exposed as liars. It's a very humiliating thing. So I think he wanted to say something like, I never saw anyone coming or going, or I never was aware of any of this. But he realizes potentially that could be contradicted. So he pulls himself back from that and then gives this much weaker description of the almost railway station there. He also talks in the negative again, saying what they were doing, why they were there, I had nothing to do with. Yeah. So what does I had nothing to do with mean? Does it mean I was miles away from it, never ever came anywhere near me, never came close to me? Or does it mean I didn't invite them? I didn't interact very often with them. I had nothing to do with is an interesting choice. You'll also notice that in this, he stutters a lot on the word I. I wasn't at a party. I described it as more as a railway station. So I'm afraid I can't make any comments because I don't really know. Now, when we say we're joining ourselves to whatever it is that we're saying. We're very sensitive about it. We don't like to say I with a lie next to it. That's why you'll find someone saying, instead of I didn't do it, they'll go, didn't do it, or wasn't me. Right? We really own things we say with the word I. And if someone stutters on I, it can indicate they're having second thoughts about saying it, or do they really want to commit to saying this? And it's very interesting that he stutters all the way through that answer on the word I. Is he having trouble taking ownership of what he is saying there? Let's hear some more from the interview.
Am I right in thinking you threw a birthday party for Epstein's girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell, at Sandringham?
No, it was a shooting weekend.
A shooting weekend?
Just a straightforward shooting weekend.
But during these times that he was a guest at Windsor Castle at Sandringham, the shooting weekend, we now know that he was and had been procuring girls.
We now know that. At the time, there was no indication to me or anybody else that that was what he was doing. And certainly, when I saw him either in the United States, when I saw him in the United States, or when I was staying in his houses in the United States, there was no indication, absolutely no indication. And if there was, you have to remember that at the time, I was patron of the NSPCC's Full Stop campaign, so I was close up with what was going on in those time about getting rid of abuse to children. So I knew what the things were to look for, but I never saw them.
Interesting answer. It starts off by saying, would I be right, you threw a birthday party for Epstein's girlfriend Ghislaine Maxwell at Sandringham? And he says, no, it was a shooting weekend, just a straightforward shooting weekend. Now, we can laugh at that. I will laugh at that. He does answer the question. Am I right in saying you threw a birthday party? And he says, no. Now, it's a yes or no question. It can be answered with yes, you're right, or no, you're wrong. And he says, no, it was a shooting weekend. The difference might be in his head. To you and me, that might still be a birthday bash. But, this is quite believable. It's quite straightforward. It's then put to him, but during these times that he was a guest at Windsor Castle, this is Epstein that she is talking about, during the times he was a guest at Windsor Castle and Sandringham, the shooting weekend, we now know that he was and had been procuring girls. And Andrew's reply is, we now know that at the time there was no indication to me or anybody else that that was what he was doing. But certainly when I saw him either in the United States, when I saw him in the United States, or when I was staying in his houses in the United States, there was no indication, absolutely no indication. And if there was, you have to remember that at the time, I was patron of the NSPCC's Full Stop campaign. So I was close up with what was going on in those times about getting rid of abuse to children. So I knew what was what the things were to look for, but I never saw them. Hell of an answer. Look how he talks about his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. He starts by saying, when I saw him either in the United States, and then he stops. Now, what follows either? It's or. So he's going to talk about seeing Jeffrey Epstein in the United States and in other places around the world. When I saw him either in the United States or in the UK, I guess is what he was going to say. I think then he realizes, this sounds really bad because it's going to make it sound like I saw Jeffrey Epstein a lot, which he may well have done. He's gone to the most honest description first, realizes it doesn't look good, so he withdraws from that. So after he says, when I saw him either in the United States, he says, when I saw him in the United States, so he's then just taken it down from the United States and the rest of the world to just saw him in the United States. And then he realizes that's really bad as well, because he's trying, remember at the very beginning, Jeffrey was away and I'd stay in his houses. Jeffrey wasn't really there when I was at his houses. So he realizes when I saw him in the United States kind of contradicts something he said earlier. So he starts again for the third time, when I was staying in his houses in the United States. So he's distanced himself. He's gone in the space of 3 starts from saying that I saw Jeffrey Epstein in the United States and at least one other country in the world, to seeing Jeffrey Epstein in the United States, to just staying in his houses in the United States. That is really shows how much he is trying to minimize things. Why is he not just being honest? These things can't all be true. The 3 things cannot all be true. And therefore, there's something going on there. And that is he's trying to downplay how often and how close he got to Jeffrey Epstein. Why the change? It's because he is trying to downplay it. We have another one of those convincers. You have to remember, it's the exact same as the other one. Look, you have to remember, okay? I know more than you, and you have to remember this. It's another one of those manipulative convincers that has a hint of arrogance in it as well. And what do we have to remember? It was I was patron of the NSPCC's Full Stop campaign. This is a resume statement. Hey, look, I know there was some interesting things going on at Jeffrey Epstein's place, but hey, I was a patron of a campaign with the NSPCC. So, me be involved in anything dodgy with Jeffrey Epstein, I was the patron of this. It does not make logical sense, but it is just a resume statement of, hey, look at the things that I was doing, then therefore I cannot in any way be dodgy. And he talks about the things that they were going on in those times. And the whole description of what it is that he did and what this meant for him, it just doesn't flow. He really is struggling to find the words. He wants to say, hey, I was really involved in the NSPCC charity, so I was well versed in what the signs were if something dodgy was going on, and I would have spotted them, but I never did. But he doesn't say that. It's really garbled. I was close up with what was going on, and only in those times, by the way. Not what does he not know what's going on now? He's such a great patron of this campaign that he's lost touch with the thing entirely. And also, he does say there was no indication, absolutely no indication, and if there was, which is leaving himself open to the fact that there could have been an indication, is he saying he didn't see it, or it was of the type that I wasn't looking for because I only knew what was going on in them times to rid abuse? It just is really garbled.
Another guest was John Brockman, the literary agent. Now, he described
Really?
seeing you there getting a foot massage from a young Russian woman. Did that happen?
No.
You're absolutely sure, or
Yeah,
you can't remember?
Absolutely sure.
So John Brockman's statement is false.
Well, I don't know Mr. Brockman, so I don't know what he's talking about.
But that definitely wasn't you getting a foot massage from a Russian girl in Jeffrey Epstein's house.
No.
So the first question is, another guest was John Brockman, the literary agent. Now, he describes seeing you there getting a foot massage from a young Russian woman. Did that happen? And Andrew's reply is no. Now, the question is, did that happen? That's a yes or no question. And he does say no, which is expected to a yes or no question. I would have liked to have heard more, like, no, that did not happen. But he does say no. And she then asks the question in a slightly different way. You're absolutely sure, or you can't remember? And he says, yeah, absolutely sure. So again, we've got a yes, no question. You're absolutely sure, or you can't remember? And he says, yeah, absolutely sure. It's then put to him, so John Brockman's statement is false. It's the same question again. She's just found three different ways of asking the same question. And this is the interesting one because he's being quite reliable. He said no, and he said, yeah, I'm sure. And then the question is the same, the content of the question is the same, the meaning of the question is the same, but this time, for him to deny it for the third time would be to call this guy John Brockman a liar. And then it gets personal. Then you are dealing with a person, not a concept or an object, if you like. And his answer is very, very interesting. So John Brockman's statement is false. Well, if we're going to be consistent with what's come before, I would be expecting, yes, that statement is false. I did not get a foot massage from a Russian girl. Instead, he says, well, I wouldn't. I don't know Mr. Brockman, so I don't know what he's talking about. Well, that's very different from, no, I didn't get a foot massage. Really interesting. 3 questions and answers. More from Andrew.
One of Epstein's accusers, Virginia Roberts,
Yeah.
has made allegations against you. She says she met you in 2001. She says she dined with you, danced with you at Tramp nightclub in London. She went on to have sex with you in a house in Belgravia belonging to Ghislaine Maxwell, your friend. Your response?
I have no recollection of ever meeting this lady. None whatsoever.
You don't remember meeting her?
No.
She says she met you in 2001. She dined with you. She danced with you. You bought her drinks. You were in Tramp nightclub in London. And she went on to have sex with you in a house in Belgravia belonging to Ghislaine Maxwell.
Didn't happen.
Do you remember her?
No. I have no recollection of ever meeting her. I'm almost, in fact, I'm convinced that I was never in tramps with her. There are a number of things that are wrong with that story. One of which is that I don't know where the bar is in tramps. I don't drink. I don't think I've ever bought a drink in tramps whenever I was there.
Do you remember dancing at Tramp?
No, that couldn't have happened because the date that is being suggested, I was at home with the children.
What did you spot in that little session then? The very first part of it was the put to him, one of Epstein's accusers, Virginia Roberts, has made allegations against you. She says she met you in 2001. She says she dined with you, danced with you at Tramp nightclub in London. She went on to have sex with you in a house in Belgravia belonging to Ghislaine Maxwell, your friend. Your response? Andrew's response is, I have no recollection of ever meeting this lady. None whatsoever. So does he answer the question? The allegation is put and the question is your response, i.e. what's your response? And he says, I have no recollection of ever meeting this lady. So he does deal with the question that's put there. It might not be a satisfactory answer to some people, but he does deal with the question that is put to him. And then he says none whatsoever. And this is like doubling down. It's like, I have no recollection of ever meeting this lady. You can't get more certain than that. Having no recollection, you can't get more certain. I have no recollection of this. So why does he feel the need to double down and say none whatsoever? It's trying too hard. Quite often, I'm not saying this is a lie, but quite often with liars, they will repeat the lie twice, or they will, turn up the severity of what it is they're saying. So instead of, I didn't do it, they'll say, I absolutely didn't do it, or I totally didn't do it. And this is a similar theme. I have no recollection of ever meeting this lady, none whatsoever. You will, I'm sure, have noticed that no recollection is not the same as I haven't met the lady. But look, that again, I think this is carefully worried so that if it ever came out that he did meet the lady, and there are pictures, he talks about the pictures, but if it does come out, then he can say, I didn't lie, I didn't say I never met her, I said I had no recollection of meeting her, and I still have no recollection of meeting her, but I understand now that we did meet. Carefully chosen words of a prepared story. The question calls her Virginia Roberts. Andrew distances himself from her and says, this lady. That's putting her down and creating distance. This lady is not something we use to, it wouldn't be a way of, I know lady is a respectful title, but this is not showing respect. This is showing disdain, the words, this lady. It continues with the question, you don't remember meeting her? And he says, no. She says she met you in 2001. She dined with you. She danced with you. You bought her drinks. You're in Tramp nightclub in London, and she went on to have sex with you in a house in Belgravia belonging to Ghislaine Maxwell. And Andrew says, didn't happen. First question, fine. So you don't remember meeting her? No. Again, it's a yes or no question, and he answers with no. And then he says, didn't, when the whole allegations are put to him, he says, didn't happen. There's a lot of things missing from that answer. What didn't happen? He's not specific about what didn't happen. All of that didn't happen. This did not happen. What didn't happen? He doesn't say, and he does this a couple of times in the interview where his answer is very terse, very, very tight. It doesn't include any content. So in here, there's nothing personal. There's no, that didn't happen. I didn't do that. No, that wasn't me. That if someone did that, it wasn't me. There's nothing personal in there at all. And there is nothing to say what didn't happen. Interesting word choices. Andrew's asked, do you remember her? And he says, no, I have no recollection of ever meeting her. I'm convinced that I was never in tramps with her. There are a number of things that are wrong with that story. One of which is that I don't know where the bar is in tramps. I don't drink. I don't think I ever bought a drink in tramps whenever I was there. Does he answer the question? The question is, do you remember her? And he says, no, I've no recollection of ever meeting her. That's a very good answer. Do you remember her? I've no recollection of ever meeting her. No, I've no recollection of ever meeting her. And then he goes on to say a paragraph which has got nothing to do with the question. This is, I believe, a prepared statement. It enables him to tell his story and stick some things out there which would be facts, in his opinion, that prove that he could never have met her. You may have noticed we have the stumble on I at the very beginning. No, I've no recollection of ever meeting her. It's another stumble on I, where is there some trouble that he has there, some stress about attaching himself to these words. And once more, he changes his story. He starts saying something, stops, thinks better of it, and restates it in a different way. He says, I'm convinced that I was never entranced with her. So he was going to say, I'm almost convinced that I was never entranced with her, or I'm almost certain I was never entranced with her. And then he realizes that gives lots of room to the fact that I'm only almost convinced, or I'm only almost certain. That means that, I could have, it's in my head that I could have. So instead of saying I'm convinced I was never entranced with her. And you'll see all the time, I believe that when we see these restates from Andrew, when he starts saying something, stops, thinks better of it, and says it in a different way, I think the first thing he says is his honest, how he feels, how he understands things, his true representation of the world, and he realizes that that's not going to work, that's not going to do me any favors, so I'm going to have to come back, roll back, stop saying what I'm saying, and restate it in a slightly different way. He says there are a number of things wrong with that story. Now, I don't know, because he goes on to deal with some things that weren't put to him in the interview question, and I think he's very aware of what that story is, and that's what he's going to deal with here. But he talks about that story, so he's very specific there. Look, there is only a number of things that are wrong with that story, not all the things that are wrong with that story, by the way. That story is not complete garbage, or that story just is rubbish, did not happen, or completely false, or all lies. It's just a number of things that are wrong with that story. And I think the strategy here is, here's a story. Instead of just saying, this did not happen, this never occurred, not a chance in hell did this happen, they've decided to pull out some things that will show, some facts that him and his team feel will show that this story is bunk. And if you look at what they are, I mean, it's rubbish. I don't know where the bar is in Tramps. Okay, did you get someone to go and get a drink for her? You don't need to know where the bar is in Tramps. I don't drink, but look, lots of people who don't drink have bought me drinks in my time. It's just a logical rubbish fact. And once again, I think the truth is coming out. I don't think I've ever bought a drink in Tramps whenever I was there. So that's not any certainty. So the number of things that are wrong with this story, just very, very, very weak. And he's asked, do you remember dancing at Tramp? And he said, no, that couldn't have happened because the date that is being suggested, I was at home with the children. So what have we got here? Do you remember dancing at Tramp? No, that couldn't have happened. What couldn't have happened? Again, we're left with this non-specific denial. That couldn't have happened. He doesn't say, do you remember dancing at Tramp? No, I don't remember dancing at Tramp. Do you know why? I wasn't dancing at Tramp because I was at home. And then why the specifics? Why did he go through all of that stuff about not knowing where the bar was, the fact that he doesn't remember dancing, the fact that he's never bought anyone a drink there that he doesn't drink? Why did he go through all those specifics when all he needed to say was, according to this explanation, none of that happened because at the time all this is alleged to have happened, I was at home with the children. Instead, he feels the need to tell us he doesn't know where the bar is and he doesn't drink. Really, really weird defense of the allegations that were put to him. Let's get some more from him.
You know that you were at home with the children. Was it a memorable night?
On that particular day that we now understand is the date, which is the 10th of March, I was at home. I was with the children. I'd taken Beatrice to a Pizza Express in Woking for a party at I suppose sort of 4 or 5 in the afternoon. And then because the Duchess was away, we have a simple rule in the family that when one's away, the other one's there. I was on terminal leave at the time from the Royal Navy, so therefore I was at home.
Why would you remember that so specifically? Why would you remember a Pizza Express birthday and being at home?
Because going to Pizza Express in Woking is an unusual thing for me to do. A very unusual thing for me to do. I've only been through Woking a couple of times, and I remember it weirdly distinctly. But as soon as somebody reminded me of it, I went, oh yes, I remember that. But I have no recollection of ever meeting or being in the company or the presence.
So does he answer the question? You know that you were at home with the children. Was it a memorable night? And he does kind of answer the question, but we'll come to see that perhaps he doesn't really. But what am I going to find comforting about this? Well, everything's in the past tense, and that is to be expected. But quite often, if you're looking for deception and someone's talking about past events and they're making stuff up, they may slip into the present tense every now and again. But here, perfect past tense. I was at home. I was with the children. I'd taken Beatrice to Pizza Express. I was on terminal leave. I was at home. All perfectly in the past tense. We still have this really careful choosing of words. Lots of us. We now understand. I was at home. I was with the children. And then the Duchess was away. I was at the time from the Royal Navy. So he still picking his words really, really, really carefully. You'll notice he was asked, was it a memorable night? And he says, on that particular day. So he doesn't talk about the night, he's talking about the day. Why the change? Look at how he describes the timings. They were for a party at about, I suppose, sort of 4 or 5 in the afternoon. That's really, really vague. At about, I suppose, sort of 4 or 5 in the afternoon. Really not specific there at all, which is incredible because in the next part of the answer, he says, I remember it weirdly distinctly, but not so weirdly distinctly that you know the time of the party. Even something rough between 4 and 5. No, it's about, I suppose, sort of 4 or 5 in the afternoon. I do want to pick out this thing though. We have a simple rule in the family that when one's away, the other one's there. Now, if he'd left it at that would be a very general thing where someone talks in generals and says, oh yeah, we have a rule in the family that when one's away, the other one's there. But then he says, I was on terminal leave at the time, so therefore I was at home. So actually he does talk in the general about what the rule is. And then he does say that it was adhered to that night. Another part about the was it a memorable night part of the question is that it's a yes or no question. Was it a memorable night? It's a yes, no question, and he does not say yes or no in reply. He's then asked, why would you remember that so specifically? Why would you remember a Pizza Express birthday and being at home? And he says, because going to Pizza Express in Woking is an unusual thing for me to do, a very unusual thing for me to do. I've only been to Woking a couple of times, and I remember it weirdly distinctly. We've spoken about that part already. Where as soon as somebody reminded me of it, I went, oh yes, I remember that. I have no recollection of ever meeting or being in the company or the presence. Why would you remember a Pizza Express birthday and being at home? He does answer the question once more. He tells us why he remembers it. It was an unusual thing for him to do. But then he does turn up the severity there. It wasn't just an unusual thing for me to do. It was a very unusual thing for me to do. And he doesn't just remember it distinctly, he remembers it weirdly distinctly. So I feel like he's turning it up there, using words like very and weirdly, so we really feel what he's saying. We've got another restart here from Andrew. I've only been to Woking a couple of times. I think there he was going to say, I've never been to Woking, or I've never been to Pizza Express in Woking. And he realises, well, that would really knacker his alibi if he says, I've never been to Woking. So once again, he changes it and goes, I've only been to Woking a couple of times. And once more, we have no recollection, which is different from I haven't met this person. I know I haven't met this person. But I'm not going to knock him too much for that because, look, that could be an indication of someone being truthful but wanting not to be caught out in a lie at some point. So that's why he uses no recollection. But once again, there's something missing. I have no recollection of ever meeting or being in the company or the presence of who? He cannot bring himself to fully say what it is that he's denying. And why is that? By the way, what I find interesting in this is that what he's talking about, what he's basing this on, is him being at home versus not in the club. What he does is he says he was at home. He doesn't say, I was not in the club. And I think you can work out, if you've got a timeline in your head, it's a nightclub, right? But he's only said that he was at this party at some point in the afternoon and then went home. Although he tries to give the illusion that he was home all night, he doesn't say he was home all night. He doesn't say he didn't go to the nightclub that night at all. So there's parts missing from here. And I think that's potentially he did go out that night. And that's why he's talking about being at home after the birthday party. That's why he doesn't say, I wasn't in the club.
So you're absolutely sure that you're at home on the 10th of March.
Yeah.
She was very specific about that night. She described dancing with you and you profusely sweating, and that she went on to have bath, possibly.
There's a slight problem with the sweating because I have a peculiar medical condition, which is that I don't sweat, or I didn't sweat at the time, and that was yes, I didn't sweat at the time because I had suffered what I would describe as an overdose of adrenaline in the Falklands War when I was shot at, and I simply it was almost impossible for me to sweat, and it's only because I have done a number of things in the recent past that I'm starting to be able to do that again. So I'm afraid to say that there's a medical condition that says that I didn't do it, so therefore.
Okay, the famous sweat answer. He's asked, so you're absolutely sure that you're at home on the 10th of March? And he says, yeah. That's a yes, no question. He answers, yeah. Although not all day, not all night. That's not what the question is. She was very specific about that night. She described dancing with you. He says, no. And you profusely sweating. And then she went on to have a bath, possibly. I think that's what said, a bath, possibly. And he interrupts and he says, there's a slight problem with the sweating because I have a peculiar medical condition, which is that I don't sweat, or I didn't sweat at the time. And that, or was she? Yes, I didn't sweat at the time because I had suffered what I would describe as an overdose of adrenaline in the Falklands War when I was shot at. And I simply, it was almost impossible for me to sweat. And it's only because I have done a number of things in the recent past that I'm starting to be able to do that again. So I'm afraid to say that there's a medical condition that says I didn't do it, so therefore. Wow, what an answer. The first thing I noticed is that he interrupts halfway through the question and forces his story to come out. Why does someone do that? It's if they've got a story to tell, whether it's a lie, whether it's a prepared story, but they really know what it is they want to say, and they cannot wait for the end of the question to come before they launch into what it is they have to say. They're very impatient, and that's what he is here, which is, again, one of the signs, I think, that we're getting a prepared story. Yeah, Andrew, tell them that you don't drink, tell them you don't know where the bar is, and tell them you don't sweat, and that will be enough. I think that's what's going on there. You'll notice the stutter. I have a peculiar medical condition. He's not wanting to put himself, or is he stressed about putting himself out there and saying that? So much repetition. There's a slight problem with the sweating. Or I didn't sweat, and that was, or was she? Yes, and I simply, it was almost impossible for me to. He's really stressed about this with the stuttering and really repeating himself while he finds what it is that he wants to say. Did you notice the contradiction? He says, I have a peculiar medical condition, which is that I don't sweat. In the present tense, I have, present tense, a peculiar medical condition, which is, present tense, that I don't sweat, present tense. Then he changes it to past tense, or I didn't sweat at the time. Whoa. I mean, that's a really big mistake to make, because he comes at the end and says, well, I do sweat now. So why would you say I don't sweat in the present tense when actually you've had a condition, a medical condition, which is that you didn't sweat, and you've done a lot recently to cure this, and you do sweat now? Why would you state it that way? I mean, it's a hell of a misspeak if it is just a misspeak. He talks about, I didn't sweat at the time. I didn't sweat at the time. He says it twice. This shows he's really knowledgeable about the time of the allegations. He doesn't describe it in a more distant way, like, I didn't sweat at that time. I didn't sweat at that time. No, it's I didn't sweat at the time. He got this overdose of adrenaline in the Falklands War when I was shot at. This is another one of those resume statements. Not only am I the patron of a NSPCC charity, but also I am a war hero. I wasn't just in the Falklands War, but I was shot at as well. Just a resume statement. How can you think I'd do something bad with Jeffrey Epstein when I'm a war hero? Some vagueness in there as well, by the way. Medical condition, let's hear what the doctors had to say about it rather than what you have to say about it. What I would describe as an overdose of adrenaline in the Falklands. Why not just say I got an overdose of adrenaline in the Falklands War? No. He's just telling us how he would describe it. Why is that? Is it because you're making it up? I don't know. And it was almost impossible for me to sweat. You know that? So this all stands on the fact that Virginia says that Andrew was sweating on the night, and he says, well, that's impossible. I have a medical condition that says I didn't do it. There is a slight problem with that. But then he says it was almost impossible for me to sweat. So he could, in his own words, have been sweating that night. And what do you make of this? This is the second time we've seen him say, I'm afraid to say, before he knocks something down, I'm afraid to say that there's a medical condition that says I didn't do it, so therefore. I'm not entirely sure what to make of this. I'm afraid to say. It could be very literal. I'm afraid to say it because it's not true, and if I get rumbled, man, that's going to be bad. Or is it more of a convincer? I'm afraid to say you're all wrong. I'm afraid to say it to you because it's beneath me to knock you down. I don't know. Really interested in your comments. If you want to comment on this platform or get in touch on social media, I'm afraid to say. What do you think of that? Here's the last bit of Prince Andrew we're going to look at.
Is it possible that you met Virginia Roberts, dined with her, danced with her in Tramp, had sex with her on another date?
No.
Do you remember meeting her at all?
No.
Do you know you didn't meet her? Or do you just not remember meeting her?
No, I don't know if I've met her. But no, I have no recollection of meeting her.
Because she was very specific. She described the dance that you had together in Tramp. She described meeting you. She was a 17-year-old girl meeting a senior member of the royal family.
Never happened.
Some familiar old themes there. He's asked, is it possible that you met Virginia Roberts, dined with her, danced with her in Tramp, and had sex with her on another date? And he says, no. Do you remember meeting her at all? He says, no. Do you know that you didn't meet, or do you just not remember it? No, I have. I don't know if I've met her, but no, I have no recollection of meeting her. We have the stutter on the I again. I don't know if I've met her. But what we do have is consistency there. I don't know if I've met her, but I have no recollection of meeting her. I think what we're getting there is that he's been kind of forced to say this. He's just been trying to go along with the no recollection of meeting her version of things. And he's been asked outright, do you know you didn't meet her? And he has to say, I don't know if I've met her, but I'm going to come back and I'm going to give you my talking point, which is I have no recollection of meeting her. I notice this is all said in the negative, by the way. He could have stated the same thing as, I may have met her, but I don't remember meeting her. It's entirely possible I met her, but I do not remember meeting her. But no, it's all done in the negative. I don't know. I don't know if I've met her, but no, I have no recollection of meeting her. It's then put to him, because she was very specific. She described the dance you had together in Tramp. She described meeting you. She was a 17-year-old girl meeting a senior member of the royal family. Can you spot what's coming next? He says, never happened. What never happened? And also, who didn't it happen to? There's nothing personal in there whatsoever. And there's nothing to describe what never happened. So there you go. There's some Prince Andrew. What are my conclusions? Look, lots of pre-planned stories, and that's no surprise. He's got a big team, and this is a very high-pressure thing. So I think there's been rehearsal, there's been talking points drawn up, there's been key phrases. I have no recollection staying at Epstein's houses to use. I think there's some limited honesty in there, and I couldn't pull apart too much for really obvious deception. But in what he says, there is lots and lots of ambiguity. There's lots of room for maneuver that if he was a little bit more certain about what he said, he could be contradicted, he could be called a liar, he could be called out. And I think that's why he's left a lot of room for ambiguity in what he says. Absolutely downplays his closeness to Epstein. It's very sensitive to him. And he tries to put as much distance between himself and Epstein as possible, even though it leaks out in his language that they were close friends, that he spent quite a bit of time with the guy at points. And this is the one that really gets me. There were some real serious allegations put towards him. And he doesn't specifically deny many of the allegations, the most serious ones. Do you remember in the last couple of bits that we listened to, there was the allegation that he bought drinks. He knocked that back. I didn't buy drinks. There's the allegation that he danced. He knocked that back. I didn't dance. Allegation that he sweated. No, I sweated. And then there was allegations about what happened at Ghislaine Maxwell's house later on that night. They're the most serious allegations, and he did not take those ones on at all, beyond the most generic, didn't happen, never happened type ways. He didn't take those on at all and debunk them the way he debunked sweating, dancing, and buying a drink. And that's really, really interesting. Why was his tactic to debunk those, but not being able to say, I couldn't have gone to another house that night because I'm really interested in that? So what are you going to take away from this? Look for qualifiers, things like, to some extent it's a stretch. That means it's not really a stretch. And the signs of prepared answers, which are repetition of key phrases, someone interrupting you when you ask a question, and also someone really thinking hard, choosing their words, and maybe starting to say something, stopping and restating it a different way. That's when you'll know if someone is giving you prepared answers. The subscribe button gets you more episodes like this, or the follow button, if that's the one you've got in front of you, gets you more episodes like this when they drop. Really interested in your comments or observations or even questions about what we've seen from Prince Andrew there. And as I said, you are now officially my marketing department, and you can do your job by pressing the like button or sharing this with someone that you think would be interested in seeing this. And if you want some more, you can find it at neveratruerword.com. You'll find more podcasts there, more videos there. You can sign up for the newsletter, and you can find all the ways to contact on social media. And we'll see you again soon for something new from Never a Truer Word.